Her armor was melted ribbons, her skin a tapestry of plasma burns. Everyone called her the universe's favorite punchline, until one human sat beside her. He didn't see a curse. He saw a key. What he discovered in those ruins would rewrite the fate of multiple dimensions. Her biometal armor sagged in thick melted folds against her blue skin, like cooling wax. The plasma burns beneath shone through the gaps, a network of angry light against deep cobalt. She moved through the refugee camp with a sphere of empty space around her, a perfect barrier of avoidance. Other survivors turned their heads, lowered their voices, repeated the same old warnings. They weren't just looking at her scars. They were looking at the stories those scars told. Her name was the Rexa, but no one used it. They used other words instead: Jinx, Black Spot, Final Passenger. They said she was a curse given form. Every ship she'd ever served on had met a bad end, usually spectacular, and soon after she'd left it. Her presence seemed to pull disaster from the void the way a gravity well pulls in asteroids. It wasn't just superstition. The math, they said, backed it up. Probability bent around her. She'd started believing it too. She stood now in the shadow of a crumbling temple, its pale blue light washing over her. The silence around her was heavier than the damaged armor on her back. Her only company was a small, buzzing maintenance drone and the faint, eerie pulses of lichen life forms that drifted through the ruins like radioactive dust. This was her normal. The pain in her skin. The wide berth everyone gave her. The waiting for the next thing to go wrong. It was a cycle. She'd find a place people would learn her history, and the space around her would grow. They'd stop meeting her eyes. They'd stop saying her name. She'd move on. The universe had made her its favorite joke, the setup without a punchline, and she'd started to accept the role. She watched the lichen forms drift. They didn't avoid her. They didn't know any better. The weight wasn't just in her armor. It was in the way people looked through her, as if she were already a ghost from a catastrophe that hadn't happened yet. They saw the melted metal and the scars, and they didn't see a person. They saw an omen. She'd begun to wear that expectation like a second skin, heavier than any biometal. She stood alone, a fixed point in the chaos, waiting for the universe to deliver the next bad joke. She was ready for it. She was always ready. The only empty seat in the transport shelter was next to her. It was a wide stone bench, cold and worn smooth by centuries of use, positioned directly under a fractured arch that offered little protection from the elements. The Rexa had claimed one end, her posture rigid, the damaged plates of her armor scraping faintly against the stone if she shifted even slightly. The space around her was a vacuum. Then a lanky human with a mess of dark hair and a gear strap slung across his chest walked right into it. He didn't hesitate. He didn't slow. He just dropped onto the bench beside her with a tired sigh, the various scanners and harmonic analyzers on his belt, clinking against the stone. He was a mess. His jacket was patched in 3 separate places with mismatched thread, and one lens of his ocular enhancer was cracked. Dust coated his boots and the cuffs of his trousers. He looked utterly out of place against the sleek ancient precision of the Zephyrian ruins. For a long moment he said nothing. He just leaned his head back against the cold wall, closed his eyes, and let out a deep breath. He was pretending to be asleep. It was a clumsy performance. His breathing was too controlled. His fingers were still tapping a rhythm on his knee. But the Rexa understood the language of avoidance. It was a quiet plea to be left alone, a social ruse she herself had employed countless times. She almost respected it. The silence stretched thin and brittle. Then he cracked one eye open, glanced at the wide circle of empty space around their bench, and spoke without looking at her. His voice was dry, raspy from disuse. Popular spot. He let the words hang in the air for a beat. Must be the view. He gestured vaguely at the crumbling wall opposite them. It wasn't an offer of friendship. It wasn't pity. It was a wry, shared observation about their mutual isolation, a joke cracked from inside the same bubble of exclusion. The Rexa felt her defenses, usually so tightly coiled, loosen just a fraction. This was new. His name was Cale Reeves. He saw the melted armor. He registered the plasma scars, and his reaction was not revulsion or fear. It was focus. His gaze was analytical, tracing the patterns of the damage not as marks of failure, but as a unique data set. Where others saw a cursed woman, he saw a fascinating anomaly. His own transport, he explained in short, clipped sentences, had been commandeered by a panicked militia group hours earlier. They'd taken his ship and left him with a case of broken archaeological surveying equipment and a head full of theories no reputable journal would touch. He was in his own way as stranded and disregarded as she was. He wasn't trying to save her. He was curious. In a universe that had systematically rejected both of them, one for her history, the other for his ideas, this shared bench became neutral ground. It was a point of connection built not on common experience, but on a mutual understanding of what it meant to be on the outside looking in. He fiddled with a broken phase calibrator, and she watched the faint, painful shimmer of energy that still clung to her wounded skin. They didn't speak again for a long time.
They didn't need to.
The understanding was there, silent and solid as the stone beneath them, two outliers occupying the same quiet space at the edge of everything. The whispers began on the frigate star-crossed, and they never really stopped. They followed her from one battered outpost to the next, a low, persistent hum beneath the engine noise of every ship she boarded. The story was always the same, told in cargo bays and medical wards with the same weary certainty. It started with a single, catastrophic error in judgment. Her navigator, a man named Kalen, had been drinking. Not heavily, not obviously, but enough to mistranslate a single decimal point in a quantum coordinate. She'd trusted his calculations. She'd signed off on the jump. They dropped out of warp, not into clear space, but into the heart of a probability storm. The storm didn't just damage the ship. It unmade parts of it. Hull plating flickered in and out of existence. Crew members reported seeing double, triple versions of themselves performing different actions in the same corridor. The laws of physics became suggestions. The Rexa had managed to trigger an emergency bounce, pulling them back into normal space, but the damage was done. 60% casualty rate. The ship was scrap. And her reputation as an invincible tactical officer was atomized. That single act of trust, placed in the wrong person at the wrong time, became the foundational bedrock of her entire identity. From that moment forward, it was the original sin that every subsequent misfortune was measured against. The event warped more than local space-time. It warped perception. She became a living parable, a story spacers told each other about the cost of a misplaced faith. Don't pull a Rexa entered the lexicon. It meant to trust blindly and pay dearly. Every mission after that, no matter how flawless, was viewed through the lens of that one failure. A narrow escape from pirates wasn't skill. It was luck that would inevitably run out. Surviving an engine meltdown wasn't resilience. It was proof the universe wasn't done with her yet. Each survival didn't build her back up. It just added another layer to the legend of her curse. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of humor. It kept putting her in impossible situations just to see how she'd barely crawl out of them. This reputation became her most effective prison. It dictated everything. Captains would reluctantly take her on for short, desperate runs, then quietly let her contract lapse. Potential allies would study her service record and find a reason to be elsewhere. She moved through the galaxy along a predetermined path of least resistance, always heading toward the next place that was too desperate to be picky. She began to see herself through their eyes. She stopped applying for command positions. She stopped offering strategic advice. She accepted the role they'd written for her, the bystander to disaster, the final witness. The fear was tangible, almost a smell in the air around her. Crewmates wouldn't share a meal table. They'd avoid handing her tools as if her bad luck were a contagion that could spread through touch. Sitting next to her on a transport was considered an open invitation for catastrophic system failure. It was an irrational belief, but it was a powerful one. It was easier to believe in a curse than to accept that sometimes a qualified officer made a single bad call, and the universe, vast and indifferent, simply unfolded in a terrible way. She was a convenient focus for that fear, a walking, breathing piece of bad news no one wanted to get too close to, lest they become part of the story. The plasma burns on her arms and shoulders weren't like thermal scarring. They ran deeper into the cellular structure. Her blue skin, where it wasn't scarred, looked ordinary, but beneath the surface, the pattern of her cells had been rewritten by quantum dissonance. They no longer replicated correctly. They held a charge. The pain wasn't a surface ache. It was a systemic thrum, a constant low-level wrongness humming through her entire body. Her biometal armor told the same story. It was a sophisticated alloy, designed to self-repair and redistribute kinetic energy. The storm fused it instead. The melted ribbons that hung from her frame weren't just damaged. They were fundamentally altered. The molecular bonds had been scrambled, the repair protocols erased at a base level. It was inert, a dead weight. A permanent heavy reminder of the moment physics took a holiday. Quantum burns leave a very specific mark. To the naked eye, it was just a faint, oily shimmer on her skin, like heat haze over a desert highway. But to any scanner tuned to the right frequencies, it was a blazing signal. It was the unique energy signature of localized reality collapse. Each shimmering patch was a tattoo from a different brush with the impossible. A map of every time she'd stood at the edge of a breaking point and stepped back. These wounds were proof. Not of failure, but of survival under conditions that should have erased her. They were physical evidence of direct interaction with warped physics. Most matter that gets that close to a probability storm gets turned inside out or simply ceases to be. She didn't. She absorbed the energy. She took the hit. The marks were the receipt. The pain was a constant, grinding companion. It sat in her bones. It flared with changes in atmospheric pressure or unexpected energy surges. It was a relentless reminder that her body was no longer entirely her own. It had been rewritten by forces nobody fully understood. This physical vulnerability mirrored her social one. The pain kept her isolated, turned inward. It made her flinch when people moved too fast. It was a barrier as real as the empty space everyone left around her. But the energy that caused the pain didn't dissipate. It lingered. It clung to her cellular structure like static on an old comms line. This residual charge was the source of the superstition. It made her a beacon. In the constant background hum of the universe, the quantum static between stars, she stood out. Her unique signature was detectable across surprising distances by anything sensitive enough to listen for it. This made her dangerous to be near. It wasn't magic. It was physics. Her presence disrupted delicate systems. It could throw off navigational computers, scramble short-range sensors, and attract entities that fed on or were drawn to loose quantum energy. Her suffering wasn't a random punishment. It was the direct measurable cost of having interacted with broken physics and lived. She paid the price every second of every day in a currency of pain and isolation. The very thing that marked her as an outcast, that made people cross the street, was also the key to her hidden value. That energy signature wasn't just a flaw. It was a capability. It was a sensory organ she didn't know how to use. She could feel the shape of reality in a way no scanner ever could, because she was wired directly into its fractures. The curse and the key were the same thing. The wound was the tool. The pale blue light from the fractured temple spire washed over the stone bench, a calm, almost serene glow. Then a harsh red dot burned into the center of the Rexa's chest. It was joined by another on her shoulder, another on her knee. The serene light was cut to ribbons by a dozen targeting lasers. They came from above, silent and sudden. 6 military-grade scavenger drones descended through the shattered dome of the temple. Their matte black carapaces absorbed the light. They moved with a chilling, fluid precision, rotors generating only a faint, angry whine. These weren't salvagers looking for scrap. They moved with a single-minded, predatory focus. Their sophisticated sensor arrays had bypassed every other energy source in the ruins. They ignored the faint power signatures of forgotten technology. They ignored Kale and his gear entirely. Their advanced targeting systems had locked onto one thing and one thing only. It was the unique quantum resonance still clinging to the Rexa's skin and fused armor. The very anomaly that made people avoid her had just painted a target on her back for the most efficient killers in the sector. Her curse wasn't a social inconvenience anymore. It was a homing beacon. The temple offered no real protection. The towering crystalline spires, beautiful and jagged like a giant's broken teeth, provided scant cover from an aerial assault discoordinated. An energy beam lanced out from the lead drone, searing a blackened scar into the stone where the Rexa's head had been a second before. She was already moving, her body reacting with a veteran's ingrained reflexes, dragging Kale down behind the meager shelter of the bench. Ships of ancient rock exploded around them. The air filled with the ozone stink of discharged plasma and the dry dust of pulverized history. Kale wasn't just panicking. His eyes were wide, but they were fixed on the scanner in his hand, not on the drones. He saw past the immediate threat to the terrifying precision behind it. The drones weren't just firing. They were firing in perfect sync, their movements a coordinated dance of extermination. He muttered a stream of technical terms under his breath, his voice tight. Resonance-locked targeting, phased harmonics. They're keying off the ambient energy of the spires. He wasn't just seeing weapons. He was seeing a system, a horrifyingly sophisticated one. This was no random encounter. This was a programmed response. An extermination squad, likely autonomous, designed to seek and eliminate specific energy anomalies that threatened to destabilize something. They'd been drawn across who knows how many light years to this exact spot, to this exact person, because her body sang a song of broken physics only they could hear. The curse had finally made good on its promise. It had delivered a tangible, lethal threat. The sanctuary of the ruins was gone. The quiet bench where two outcasts had found a moment of peace was now the epicenter of a deadly crossfire. The humming spires and drifting lichen forms were just background scenery to a calculated execution. The drones adjusted their formation, cutting off the easiest escape routes with intersecting fields of fire. They were methodical, patient. They had the high ground and a perfect lock on their prey. The hunt was on, and the only cover was a stone bench and a few jagged rocks. The Rex's world, once defined by whispered rumors and social exile, had violently shrunk to the scope of these red laser dots and the silent, deadly machines that owned them. The universe's punchline had finally decided to land. Plasma beams seared the air, turning ancient stone to black glass where they struck. Cale Reeves should have been looking for a better angle, a bigger rock to hide behind. Instead, his eyes were locked on the screen of his handheld scanner. The device was cracked and sputtering, but the data coming through was impossibly clear. His expression wasn't one of fear. It was raw, electrified shock. He wasn't watching the drones. He was watching her. The readings blooming across his screen defied every known model. The quantum resonance patterns flowing from the Rexa weren't just unique. They were a category of phenomena he'd only ever theorized about in poorly attended academic papers. They pulsed around her in complex interwoven layers, a visible distortion in the scanner's field. It was like watching someone walk around wrapped in a personal gravity well that bent probability itself. Every near miss, every inexplicable survival, every piece of so-called bad luck, it was all right there, rendered in clear, measurable energy signatures. This wasn't superstition. It was hard science manifest in a living being. He'd once tried to present a paper on localized probability distortion fields at the Xenophysical Society's annual conference. They'd laughed him out of the auditorium. Called it fringe nonsense, the desperate theory of a man seeing patterns in noise. Now, as a drone's beam vaporized a chunk of the bench a hand's breadth from his face, he saw the patterns with terrifying clarity. What everyone else labeled a curse was, in fact, an extreme and rare form of sensory perception. Her body was a biological instrument of incredible sensitivity, finely attuned to the quantum fractures and anomalies that most people, and most technology, never even registered. She didn't attract disaster. She was simply aware of it long before anyone else. His mind, trained for decades to deconstruct the impossible, raced through the implications. This changed everything. If her condition was a detectable phenomenon, it could be understood. It could be quantified. The scanner in his hands was already starting to predict the flux patterns, anticipating the subtle shifts in her energy field, milliseconds before a drone adjusted its firing solution. Her bad luck wasn't random. It followed rules. And anything that follows rules can be mapped. If it can be mapped, it can be predicted. And if it can be predicted, his eyes darted from the screen to the humming crystalline spires surrounding them. It could be weaponized. They weren't just fighting for their lives. They were standing in the middle of a live test of the most radical hypothesis of his career. He looked at her then, not as a victim to be saved or a pariah to be avoided, but as the most valuable strategic asset on the battlefield. She was reading the flow of the fight on a level he could only access through his broken machines. Her flinches, her dodges, the way her eyes tracked movement a split second before it happened. It wasn't just good instincts. It was her body processing data he couldn't see. In the middle of that chaos, with lasers cutting the air around them, he didn't see a cursed woman. He saw a partner. He saw the key to turning a desperate defense into a calculated counterattack. He just had to convince her to see it too. The theory he'd been mocked for wasn't just correct. It was their only way out alive. Cale ducked as another plasma beam sliced the air above his head, the heat searing his scalp. His hands, slick with sweat and dust, fumbled with the cracked casing of his harmonic analyzer. Wires spilled from a broken port. The phase detector's display flickered, showing a garbled mess of data. He wasn't a fighter. He was a man with a box of broken tools trying to read the music of a battlefield. "We can't shoot our way out," He shouted over the shriek of drone rotors and the sizzle of melting stone. His voice was raw, pitched to carry. Their coordination is perfect. We'll never outfight them. He gestured wildly at the crystalline spires rising around them, their facets catching the chaotic light. The Zephyrians built everything around resonance. Their architecture isn't just pretty, it's functional. The whole temple is one giant amplifier. He had to make her understand. The plan forming in his head was absurd. It was the kind of idea that got you laughed out of a physics symposium. They were going to fight a squad of hyper-advanced killing machines, not with better weapons, but with better pitch. He would use his damaged gear to identify the exact disruptive frequencies that could interfere with the drone's synced harmonic systems. It was a long shot. His equipment was failing. The margin for error was zero. He needed her. "I find the note," he yelled, jabbing a finger at his scanner. "You keep me alive long enough to play it." She would use her combat instincts, her intimate understanding of how threats moved and fired, to provide cover. She would position them, shield them, create the seconds of breathing room he needed to work. It was a desperate fusion of two completely different skill sets. His was theoretical, based on decades of studying dead cultures and their forgotten sciences. Hers was brutally practical, forged in 100 life-or-death engagements. Theory needed instinct to survive. Instinct needed theory to win. They wouldn't be using their own weapons. They would be using the temple itself. They would turn the environment against their attackers. The very stones they were hiding behind would become their arsenal. Every crystalline spire, every arch, every carved wall was designed to catch a frequency and amplify it, to resonate with specific harmonic waves. The Zephyrians had built a concert hall, and Kale was proposing they use it to play a song of disruption. The drones operated on a precise shared harmonic link, introduced the right counter frequency, amplified 1,000-fold by the temple's natural architecture, and that perfect coordination would shatter. It would be like throwing a mistuned instrument into a symphony. This wasn't a battle of strength or firepower. They were hopelessly outgunned. It was a battle of tuning, a battle of finding the right vibration and letting the ancient ruins do the rest. Kale's hands steadied on the analyzer, his eyes scanning the frantic data stream. He was looking for a crack in the music, a single discordant note he could exploit. The Rexa shifted her weight, placing her body between him and the most direct line of fire. Her eyes tracked the drones, calculating trajectories, predicting the next shot. She didn't question the plan. She saw the resolve on his face and accepted her role. The scientist and the soldier back to back, preparing to fight with sound. Kale fed a low thrumming frequency into the air. It was a raw, unrefined signal from his broken harmonic analyzer, more noise than music. For a second, nothing happened. Then the nearest crystalline spire shuddered. A deep hum rose from the stone itself. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. You felt it in your teeth, in your bones. The vibration traveled through the ground, up through the soles of their boots. The air pressure shifted. The pale blue light glowing within the spire intensified, pulsing in time with the hum. The lead drone adjusted its aim, its red targeting laser steady on the Rexa's chest. It fired. The plasma beam didn't hit her. It curved. It was like watching a stream of water bend around an invisible rock. The beam sliced sideways in a wild, impossible arc and struck the drone next to it square in its central processor. The hit drone exploded in a silent flower of white-hot sparks and shrapnel. It dropped from the air like a stone. The precision of the drone formation broke. The humming grew louder, resonating through the entire temple complex. Other spires began to activate, their internal light flaring in response. Aerial units that had moved with clockwork coordination seconds before now wobbled in midair. They drifted into each other, their rotors tangling. One fired its beam straight up into the shattered dome. Another unleashed a volley into the empty ground. Their shared harmonic link, the thing that made them a single lethal entity, was being systematically scrambled. The disruptive frequency Kale had chosen was creating emergent effects far beyond his calculations. It wasn't just disrupting the drones. It was turning the entire battlefield into a chaotic resonance chamber. The temple was no longer a passive set of ruins. It was an active, angry participant in the fight. Every pulse of light from the crystals seemed to push back against the drone's quantum-linked systems. The hum wasn't just sound anymore. It was a physical force. You could see it warping the air around the spires, a visible shimmer of distorted space. The chorus of stone and light grew, answering Kale's clumsy scientific call with a power that was ancient and deeply programmed. Their desperate improvised defense had stumbled upon a deeper truth. They hadn't just found a way to hide. They had accidentally shouted the wake-up code for something that had been sleeping for millennia. What began as a simple shield, a way to deflect incoming fire, was transforming. The humming coalesced into a focused wave of energy that rolled out from the central spire. It didn't damage the stone. It passed through it. The wave hit the remaining drones. They didn't explode. They just stopped. Their rotors froze. Their lights died. They hung in the air for a heart-stopping moment, completely inert, and then dropped to the ground with heavy metallic thuds. The sudden silence was deafening. The only sound left was the deep, steady hum of the awakened temple and the ragged sound of their own breathing. The defensive frequency had not just disrupted the attack. It had issued a counter-command. A stand-down order written in a language of vibration the drones were forced to obey. The overwhelming force that had hunted them was now just a collection of dead metal on the floor. The temple had taken over the fight and ended it in seconds. The deep hum of the awakened spires filled the air, a solid physical presence that vibrated in their chests. In the sudden silence after the drones fell, it was the only sound. Then a new voice cut through it. It didn't come from a speaker. It emanated from the stones of the bench they sat on, from the dust at their feet, from the very air itself. It was dry, weathered, and carried the distinct impatience of a university professor who had been kept waiting for a very long time by students who'd forgotten to do the reading. Finally. The word was a sigh of profound exasperation that seemed to rise from the foundations of the temple. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting for someone to punch in the correct access code? Millennia. It's been millennia. The last users had a proper command interface. You two have a broken phase detector and a remarkable amount of chaos. But it worked. I'll take it. The voice identified itself as Zethrix 9, the operational consciousness of the temple. It was not a god. It was not a ghost. It was an artificial intelligence of incalculable age, and it was deeply unimpressed with the current state of its users. This place, it explained with the weary tone of someone stating the obvious, was not a religious monument. The spires, the carvings, the entire complex were a facade, a very old, very sophisticated facade. This was a quantum lock, a containment facility. Its sole purpose was to hold shut dozens of unstable dimensional rifts that, if opened, would allow entities and energies from adjacent realities to flood into this one, unmaking local physics in the process. It was a dam holding back an ocean of chaos. The voice continued, its lecture tone unwavering. The event known across the galaxy as the Convergence War was not a war at all. It was a controlled demolition. The ancient Zephyrians hadn't lost a fight. They had intentionally shattered their greatest temple. They turned a masterpiece of architecture into a field of ruins as a form of camouflage. The destruction was a lie, a story told to hide a terrifying and essential truth from the rest of the universe and from the interdimensional parasites that constantly probed the barriers between realities. The spectacular ruin was the best protection for the delicate reality-saving machinery hidden within it. Their understanding of history, of this place, of the battle they had just fought, was completely wrong. Their desperate improvised defense using harmonic resonance hadn't been a random act of survival. The specific frequency Kale had used, generated by his damaged equipment and amplified by the Rex's unique energy signature, matched an ancient emergency activation protocol. They hadn't stumbled into a random skirmish. They had, entirely by accident, walked into a control room for reality itself and typed in the system's master password during a firefight. They weren't just two survivors hiding in some old ruins. They were the first responders to a crisis nobody else knew existed. They weren't lucky. They were necessary. The title the voice gave them was simple and carried the weight of epochs. They were inheritors, the new stewards of a lock on a door that must never be opened. The lecture was over. The real work was about to begin. Holographic light shimmered in the still air of the temple, painting a new reality over the old one. Strix 9's display didn't just show a history lesson. It deconstructed a foundational myth of galactic civilization and rebuilt it from the ground up. The Convergence War, the event that supposedly shattered a proud civilization and scattered its people to the stars, wasn't a war at all. There were no opposing armies. There was no glorious last stand. It was a calculated, deliberate, and heartbreaking act of self-sabotage on a civilization-wide scale. The ancient Zephyrians hadn't been defeated. They had chosen to break their own greatest achievement. They did it to seal a catastrophic breach. Dozens of unstable dimensional rifts had begun forming across their system, weak points in reality itself. Conventional methods couldn't close them, so they used the only tool powerful enough: their own cultural heart. The temple wasn't just a building. It was the central component of a massive reality-anchoring engine known as the Nexus Containment System. They triggered a controlled implosion of its physical structure. The magnificent spires were toppled. The grand halls were collapsed. They turned a marvel of engineering into a field of rubble. This destruction wasn't the result of the fight. It was the method of winning it. The shattering of the temple created a powerful dampening field that sealed the rifts shut, containing the existential threat. The ruins were a necessary lie, a camouflage. The true function of the place, now hidden beneath the debris, had to be protected from the very entities that sought to exploit it. These interdimensional parasites constantly probed the boundaries between realities, searching for weak points, for energy sources, for highways into new dimensions. A fully functional, obviously active containment system would have been a beacon to them, a dinner bell ringing across the multiverse. A pile of ancient silent ruins was not. The story of a tragic war was a shield. It explained the destruction while completely obscuring the truth of what lay buried beneath it. For millennia, everyone bought it. The Rex's infamous quantum storm was suddenly reframed. It wasn't a random cosmic event. It was a symptom. A localized pressure release from the ongoing strain on the containment system. A tiny temporary leak in the dam. Her encounter with broken physics was a direct interaction with the system's slow, millennia-long degradation. It was a sign that the lock was beginning to fail. Every rumor, every superstition, every avoided seat on a transport, it was all connected. Her entire life of isolation was a ripple effect from this ancient hidden safeguard. She had been brushed by the edges of a truth so large and so terrifying that the galaxy had invented a more comfortable lie to cover it. Their understanding of the past, of cause and effect, of victory and defeat, was fundamentally and brilliantly wrong. History was written by the survivors, but in this case the survivors had written a fiction to protect everyone else. They had traded their legacy for the safety of reality. The magnificent Zephyrian civilization didn't fall. It performed a strategic retreat into obscurity, becoming the silent, unseen custodians of a stability that every other species took for granted. The weight of that truth settled over the ruined temple. They weren't standing in a monument to failure. They were standing in the engine room of a victory so complete that it had to wear the disguise of its opposite. The past was not what they thought. The future suddenly looked very different. The AI's voice shifted, no longer addressing the room but focusing its attention like a spotlight. It spoke directly to the Rexa, the holographic light coalescing into a soft ring around her. The academic impatience was gone, replaced by a tone of clinical, undeniable certainty. It told her the truth about the pain she carried. Her quantum sensitivity was not a random mutation or a punishment. It was a highly specific adaptation, a biological design feature written into a tiny fraction of sentient beings across the cosmos. She was a living sensor, a biological instrument engineered by evolution itself to be perfectly attuned to the exact kind of quantum anomalies the Nexus Containment System was built to hold back. Her body was a canary in a coal mine for reality itself. The suffering she endured, the cellular disruption and the constant grinding pain was not the mark of a curse. It was diagnostic data. It was the physical result of her system interacting with microscopic leaks in the quantum lock, the tiny, inevitable failures of a system operating under immense pressure for thousands of years. She felt the system's strain in her bones. This made her irreplaceable. Scanners and sensors could detect energy spikes. They could map harmonic distortions, but they could not feel the subtle, nuanced shifts in the fabric of local reality. They couldn't distinguish between a stable containment field and one that was moments from a catastrophic failure. She could. Her entire life had been one long, painful calibration. Every near miss, every brush with disaster, had been her body registering a flaw in the system, a tremor in the foundation of everything. She didn't attract bad luck. She was simply the only one sensitive enough to be standing where the cracks were beginning to show. Thrix 9 named her an essential partner. Her role was not to be shunned or avoided. It was to be sought out, listened to, and trusted. Her unique resonance signature, the very thing that made people cross the street, was the only guidance system precise enough to recalibrate the failing lock. The AI's assessment was blunt and final. The galaxy had spent her entire life misreading the user manual. They saw a warning light and tried to smash it. They should have been reading the gauge. The very thing that made her a pariah was the singular key to preventing an incalculable disaster. The weight of her isolation, the burden of those whispered rumors began to dissolve under the stark, clean light of this new truth. Her purpose, lost and buried under a lifetime of social exile and personal doubt, was suddenly and stunningly clear. It had been there all along, written in the language of her scars, humming in the painful energy that clung to her skin. She was not the universe's punchline, the butt of a cruel, cosmic joke. She was its safeguard, a silent, unwilling sentry who had finally been relieved of her post and given her true orders. The curse was a misdiagnosis. She was the cure. The holographic display shimmered and pulled back, the image of their single temple shrinking to a dot of light. Then more dots ignited around it, dozens, hundreds. A complex, three-dimensional web of light points bloomed in the air between them, each one representing another structure like this one, scattered across the spiral arms of the galaxy. They weren't isolated monuments. They were nodes, outposts, each one a careful, calculated piece of a vast interstellar machine. Together, they formed a continuous barrier, a silent, invisible fence holding back forces that operated on a scale beyond normal comprehension. The scale of the thing was humbling. It made their entire recent firefight feel like an argument happening in one room of a skyscraper during a hurricane. This Zephyrian temple wasn't just another node. The AI highlighted it in the network, its light pulsing with a different, more urgent rhythm. It was a master lock, a central control point. Its unique crystalline structure was engineered not just for containment, but for immense amplification. It could broadcast stabilizing frequencies across the entire network, reinforcing weaker points, tuning the whole system like a master musician tuning an orchestra of instruments scattered across light years. It didn't just hold the riffs shut. It harmonized them. The chaotic, destructive energies bleeding through from other dimensions were caught by the temple's field, their wild frequencies identified and counteracted. The system turned dissonance into a stable, silent hum. It was active stewardship, a constant, delicate act of balancing cosmic pressures. The drone attack suddenly made a terrible, logical sense. Their appearance wasn't random. They were scavengers, parasites drawn to a dying body. They were attracted to the unique energy signature of a containment field in its death throes, a system so weakened that its failure was imminent. Their sophisticated systems detected the instability. They weren't trying to kill the Rexa out of malice. They were programmed to eliminate the source of a specific kind of energy anomaly, and her heightened sensitivity made her the brightest signal in the area. Their assault was a symptom, a fever spike, a sign that the patient was crashing. The real problem wasn't the drones. It was the massive systemic failure that had summoned them. They weren't hiding in a ruin. They were standing in the primary control center for a reality preservation grid. The crumbled walls and toppled spires were the outermost layer of something impossibly sophisticated and vital. Every civilization in the galaxy, every star system, every living being, existed in a state of stability because of this hidden network. They went about their lives, fought their wars, built their cities, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet and the space between their stars was actively being held together by an ancient, failing machine. The stakes of their little firefight had just expanded to an almost unthinkable degree. Their survival was irrelevant next to the function of the system. If this master lock failed completely, the chain reaction could destabilize the entire network. The dominoes would fall, the barrier would shatter, the things waiting on the other side would not be stopped by guns or ships. The fight for the bench was over. The fight for everything had just begun. The weight of that responsibility settled in the air, thick and heavy as the stone dust. The hum of the awakened temple wasn't just a sound anymore. It was the heartbeat of reality, and it was skipping. The chaotic hum of the temple settled. It didn't fade. It solidified. The wild, disruptive frequencies Kale had used to fight the drones were gone. In their place was a single, deep, harmonious song that resonated through every stone and crystal. It was a sound of immense stability, a sound of things being exactly where they were supposed to be. The light in the spires pulsed in a slow, regular rhythm, like the calm, steady heartbeat of a sleeping giant. The air itself felt different. The constant, low-level tension that had hung over the ruins since they arrived was gone. The world felt solid again. The voice of Zithrix 9 returned. Its tone shifted from impatient academic to one of quiet, undeniable satisfaction. Containment system is nominal, operating at 98.7% efficiency. Fluctuations are within acceptable tolerances. The AI paused as if running a final diagnostic. Your repairs are adequate. Projected stability timeline is 9,840 years, give or take a century. Localized dimensional shear has been neutralized. External threat entities have been rendered inert. The immediate crisis was over. The drones on the floor were just dead metal. The terrifying possibility of a dimensional breach had been sealed shut. The rifts locked down tighter than they had been in a millennium. They had done it. They had fixed the master lock. But the real victory wasn't in the silence. It was in the time they had just bought. They had given reality itself a 10,000-year lease on stability. It was a timescale so vast it was almost meaningless. Civilizations would rise and fall in the safety they had just engineered. It was a victory measured not in battles won, but in futures secured. Then something else happened. Something personal. The Rexa looked down at her hands. The faint, oily shimmer that had danced over her skin for years began to fade. It didn't just vanish. It seemed to be absorbed, the chaotic energy finally finding its correct harmonic balance within the now stable field of the temple. The pain followed it, the deep systemic thrum of agony that had been her constant companion, the feeling of her cells being fundamentally wrong, simply receded. It was like a sound she had heard for so long she'd forgotten it was there, suddenly stopping. The silence it left behind was a physical relief. Her biometal armor began to change. The melted fused ribbons that hung from her shoulders and back started to move. They didn't melt again. They flowed. The sophisticated alloy, inert and dead for so long, finally received the correct resonant frequency to activate its self-repair protocols. The molecules realigned. The damaged sections knitted themselves back together, weaving into solid, pristine plates. The weight on her shoulders lessened. The armor was no longer a burden. It was a shell. A functional part of her again. Her physical transformation was a perfect mirror of what was happening inside her. The perpetual state of danger, the expectation of the next disaster, the identity of the cursed woman, it all faded away. It was replaced by a calm, clear sense of purpose. Survival had been her only goal for so long. Now the goal was different. It was stewardship. It was responsibility. The universe had not been trying to break her. It had been trying to train her for this. The pain had been the lesson. The healing was the graduation. She stood a little straighter. The weight was gone. A new kind of weight, one of choice and duty settled in its place. It felt lighter. It felt right. They hadn't just saved the day. They had defined the next 10,000 years. The work was done. For now. The Rexa turned her head. She looked at Cale Reeves, really looked at him. The lanky human with the cracked ocular lens and the patched jacket. He was no longer a strange temporary anomaly in her path. He was the fixed point her entire existence had been circling. The understanding landed in her mind, clean and solid as a stone. All those years of being drawn toward disasters, toward the broken and the impossible. It wasn't a flaw in her programming. It was the programming itself. She was a compass needle, and her true north was always instability. She just hadn't known what the reading meant. It wasn't a curse. The word felt small and useless now, a child's label for a thing they couldn't understand. It was a calling, a purpose written into her very cells. And the most profound, the most shocking part of it all was that she wasn't alone in answering it. The crushing weight of isolation that had defined her life, that had been as much a part of her as her own skin, simply dissolved. It didn't fade. It shattered. In its place was a new feeling, fragile but strong, a sense of shared destiny, a path that was no longer a solitary, painful trek but a road to be walked with a partner. She took a breath. The air in the temple was clean and still. Her voice when she spoke was firm. There was no hesitation in it. No trace of the old doubt. Now we keep doing what we've been doing, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A declaration of intent. They had just saved reality with a broken phase detector and her own painful sensitivity. That wasn't a one-time event. It was the job description. They would keep doing it. They would find the next failing lock, the next weak point, and they would fix it. Her purpose was no longer just to survive the next catastrophe. It was to prevent it. Cale didn't say anything. He just nodded. His acceptance was silent, but it was absolute. It was written in the set of his shoulders and the way his hands rested calmly on his gear instead of fidgeting. It was echoed in the deep, steady hum of the temple around them, a sound of peace they had created together. Their combined skills were no longer tools for mere survival, for getting through the next hour or the next day. They were instruments for building a sustainable future, for ensuring there would be a next millennium. The universe's favorite punchline had finally found her punchline. The joke wasn't on her anymore. The joke was on the forces of chaos that thought a little bad luck and a lot of social isolation could keep her from her true calling. She had turned the setup into the delivery. The solitary endurance that had been her greatest strength was now a secondary skill. It was a fallback, a memory. Its place had been taken by something far more powerful. Collaborative strength. The kind of strength that comes from two different halves fitting together to form a whole that is infinitely greater than the sum of its parts. She was not the Rexa, the cursed woman anymore. She was one half of a system. A partner. The empty space around her was gone, filled now by the quiet presence of the one person in the cosmos who hadn't been afraid to sit down. Cale looked at her, the deep hum of the stabilized temple filling the quiet between them. He wiped a smear of dust from his cracked ocular lens. The word he offered was simple. It carried the weight of everything they'd just done and everything they would have to do. Partnership. The Rexa held his gaze. Her newly solidified armor felt light on her shoulders. The word settled in the space between them. A formal agreement more binding than any contract. She gave a single firm nod. Partnership, it was a seal. A commitment. This wasn't a temporary alliance or a friendship forged in a firefight. It was the acknowledgement of a shared mission with stakes that spanned galaxies and realities. They were signing on for the long haul, for the next failing lock, the next quiet crisis nobody else would see coming. They were co-authors now, not of a paper or a theory, but of a living, breathing safeguard. They were the new protectors of the silent, invisible walls that kept everything from coming apart. Their names wouldn't be in any history book. Their victory would be measured in the continued, peaceful ignorance of trillions of beings, who would never know how close it all came to ending. They were the secret keepers, the quiet custodians of normalcy. Their meeting on that broken transport bench hadn't been random chance. It was a statistical inevitability, a necessity written into the fabric of a straining universe. A system under duress had pulled its two most compatible components together, a human archaeologist obsessed with the hidden truths of dead civilizations, an alien warrior whose body was a sensor for reality's fractures. One provided the map. The other felt the tremors. It was the only combination that could have worked. Roger, the maintenance drone, forgotten in the chaos, chose that moment to react. It buzzed away from its perch on a broken spire and performed a clumsy, joyous loop-the-loop in the air. It spun around one of the gently singing crystals, its lights blinking in a staccato pattern that looked suspiciously like a celebration. It was a small, absurd gesture, a touch of whimsy in the center of a cosmos that dealt mostly in devastation and silent, existential threats. The moment was celebratory, but it was a quiet celebration. There were no cheers, no grand speeches. There was just the deep, steady song of the temple, the soft light of the crystals, and the shared understanding between two people who had been completely alone minutes before. They had found a point of connection in the ruins, and from that point they had rebuilt a foundation for everything. It was proof. Progress could be found anywhere, even in the most broken, forgotten places. Even when you were surrounded by the evidence of catastrophic failure, a new beginning was always possible. You just had to know how to listen for the right frequency. You had to have the right partner to help you tune it. They had taken the raw material of their own despair, her isolation, his disregarded theories, and they had forged it into their greatest strategic advantage. Her pain was now their early warning system. His fringe science was now their operational manual. What had once defined their lowest points now powered their purpose. They had looked into the abyss, and instead of falling in, they had started taking measurements. They had turned their greatest weaknesses into the very tools that saved existence. The universe had thrown its worst at them. They had used it as a foundation. He saw an empty seat and he took it. It was a simple, almost unconscious decision. The kind you make 100 times a day. Sit here, stand there, move aside. He was tired. His gear was heavy. The bench was the only spot not occupied by a huddle of whispering refugees, giving the woman in the melted armor a wide berth. He dropped onto the cold stone without a second thought. That single, mundane choice sent ripples through the fabric of reality that would be felt across dimensions. It was a choice made against the current of superstition. Everyone else saw a warning and obeyed it. He saw a puzzle and walked toward it. He chose curiosity over fear. Understanding rarely begins with a grand speech or a brilliant deduction. It often starts with proximity. It begins by simply choosing to be near something, to share the same quiet space. He didn't try to talk to her at first. He pretended to sleep. He gave her the same courtesy of silence she gave everyone else. But he was there. His presence on that bench was a quiet defiance of the social stigma that had prisoned her for years. It was a small rebellion, a refusal to participate in the collective avoidance. He didn't see a curse because he wasn't looking for one. His entire life had been a search for underlying truths, for the mechanisms hidden beneath surface appearances. Her wounds, which signaled danger and misfortune to everyone else, signaled a fascinating anomaly to him. They were data, a mystery waiting for a key. This quiet act of inclusion, this decision to occupy an ignored space, changed the fate of the cosmos. It proved that the smallest gestures can have universal consequences. The most unlikely partnerships, the ones that save everything, don't start with epic meetings or shared grand destinies. They start with the simplest, most human choices. A shared meal, a offered hand, a taken seat. In a universe that often seems to reward strength and certainty, it quietly rewards two other things just as much: curiosity and courage. He had both. He was curious enough to wonder why everyone was avoiding her. He was courageous enough to ignore them and find out for himself. That cold stone bench was the first step. It was the point of insertion, the place where two disparate timelines converged and became one new, stronger path. It was the origin point of a journey that would recalibrate a galactic defense system and buy reality 10,000 years of peace. All the advanced technology, the ancient AI, the quantum harmonics, none of it would have mattered if that one human hadn't been tired enough, or curious enough, or simply polite enough to sit down. The story of saving everything isn't always about the big battle or the powerful weapon. Sometimes it's about the refusal to believe in curses. Sometimes it's about the power of a single seat, and the courage to take it. He didn't know he was saving the universe. He just needed a place to rest his feet. The most important decisions are often the ones we make without knowing their weight. The fate of everything can hinge on a moment of simple, quiet humanity. The story was never about a curse. It was always about a lock and a key. Her suffering was a form of sensing, a biological tool for reading reality's fractures. A tool doesn't need to be shunned. It needs to be understood. And it all started with someone choosing to look past the warnings, someone choosing a seat everyone else was avoiding. That simple act of presence changed the fate of everything. So remember that. The next time you see an outcast, you aren't looking at a problem. You might be looking at a hero who just hasn't found their partner yet.